Welcome to Beekeeping Today podcast presented by Beeculture. Beekeeping Today podcast is your source for beekeeping news, information, and entertainment. I'm Jeff Ott.
And I'm Kim Flatham.
Hey, Jeff and Kim. Today's sponsor is Global Patties. They're a family-operated business that manufactures protein supplement patties for honeybees. It's a good time to think about honeybee nutrition. Feeding your hives protein supplement patties will ensure that they produce strong and healthy colonies by increasing brood production and overall honey flow. Now is a great time to consider what type of patty is right for your area and your honeybees. Global offers a variety of standard patties as well as custom patties to meet your needs. No matter where you are, Global is ready to serve you out of their manufacturing plants in Airdrie, Alberta, and in Butte, Montana, or from distribution depots across the continent. Visit them today at www.globalpatties.com.
Hey everybody, each week we get to talk about how much we appreciate our sponsor support. They help make all of this happen and provide us the ability to bring you each episode. With that, thanks to Beeculture Magazine for continuing their presenting sponsorship of this podcast. Beeculture has been the magazine for American beekeeping since 1873. Subscribe to Beeculture today. We also want to thank 2 Million Blossoms as sponsor of this episode. 2 Million Blossoms is a quarterly magazine dedicated to protecting all pollinators. Learn more on our Season 2, Episode 9 podcast with editor Kirsten Trainer and from visiting www.2millionblossoms.com, and that is with a number 2. And also check out the new 2 Million Blossoms podcast we're behind. It's also available on her website or from the 2 Million Blossoms website and from wherever you download and stream your shows. Hey, Kim. It's been a wild time here in the Pacific Northwest. Weather's we're melting here, man.
I was thinking you guys should be about medium rare right about now after the last couple of weeks, right?
I think just stick a fork in us. We're done. Turn us over. We are. It's this last week actually. In all honesty, has been back down to normal weather. But 10 days ago we were over 100. How do bees handle that heat?
Well, most people's bees are going to be bearding in weather like that, and the more you can do to provide some cool environment for them, the better they're going to be. Putting them in the shade, if you can, or dumping water on the cover if you can, or if you got an insulated cover, try that. Anything you can do to make the colony cooler, because they spend a lot of energy cooling the inside of the hive, moving air in and out, and a lot of time wasted hanging on the front of the hive.
Yeah. I tip back I have telescoping regular telescoping covers. I tip those back, and then and when it gets really hot, I even pop up the top the front of the inner cover just to get that heat out of give it a better room to escape. And I pull the sticky boards on the screen bottom boards so that gets more airflow through too.
Yep,
that
helps.
Seems to reduce the bearding on the front of the hives.
Whatever you can do to make it better for them. If you've got a regular cover on and you got an extra pail of water, cool that cover off. Just dump it on and cool off. Let it run down the sides of the hives. It's just whatever you can do.
Yeah,
bees are going to make it through, but it's tougher when it's hot. Tougher for the beekeeper, too.
So how's Honeybee Obscure coming along?
We're doing good. We just did one on the road. Jimmy was on the road, and he took his equipment and he set it up in some place that he hasn't set it up before. So we tried it, and we're going to let you decide how well it worked. It seems like it worked pretty good. We were talking about hot bees.
Yeah.
And not the kind that are angry, but the kind that, like you and I were just talking about. What do you do with hot bees? So let us know how it worked. If it didn't work, we'll do it again.
No, I'm sure it'll be fine. You guys are pros at this point. The Honeybee Obscure podcast, you guys produce on a regular Thursday morning release basis. And they're really fun shows. They're short 10, 15-minute explorations of all things honeybees. You guys have been doing it, have been talking together for quite a few years, and it really shows in these podcasts.
Well, we were just talking about that. The last show that we did, we've been doing basically this for 33 years. we've known each other, and we've just been talking bees, and that's what we do. We just talk bees.
That's good. Well, I encourage our listeners, if you haven't listened to Honeybee Obscura yet, make sure you go out to their website, honeybeeobscura.com, and listen there, or you can go find and subscribe to the podcast from wherever you like to listen to your show, whether it be Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or Spotify or Stitcher, or, man, you guys are everywhere. So are we. We're everywhere. We're everywhere. Kim, each week we talk about our sponsors and how grateful we are for our sponsors. And one of the things that sponsorship affords us is the ability to provide transcripts to our listeners of each episode of Honeybee Obscura and now Beekeeping Today podcast. And so our listeners, if you like transcripts and or beekeepers who can't enjoy podcasts because of their hearing difficulties, the transcripts are now available to read along as you listen to a podcast, or to go to the website and read, and you can hear word for word everything we say. You've taken a look at our transcripts, haven't you, Kim?
Yeah, the transcript service that you found does a good job. They're fast. We get a good turnaround, and they just got rid of that. They're good.
Yeah. We should a virtual wave to our transcriber. So appreciate all the hard work they do, because I know there's quite a few ahs and ums and those pauses that they help out with. So, listeners, if you get a chance, take a look at the transcripts and encourage your beekeepers who might benefit from transcripts to take a look at their website as well. Kim, I know it's the middle of July, but looking forward at the fall, and now that things are opening up I shouldn't say post-COVID, but now that things are opening up going into the fall, bee conferences are coming up. And we have one coming up the first weekend in October there in Medina.
Yeah, Jerry's got a program coming up. It's his October event, and it's Be Diverse. And if you take a look at Beeculture magazine or go on the webpage, you can see, I want to say there's 15 speakers. He's got a bunch of people covering all sorts of aspects, perspectives, experiences in beekeeping, from state inspectors to scientists to people involved in research and university level. So it's going to be a good 2 days. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, the title is Being Diverse, Inspiring Leaders in Beekeeping, and they're all women and researchers and leaders in the beekeeping industries, two of which we've had on the show. Tammy Horn-Potter, who's been on a couple episodes recently, a couple weeks ago, talking about her new book, and also Dr. Sue Colby from out here, originally from Ohio State University, but now she's out here in the wonderful state of Washington, and she'll be talking about queen rearing, and so it sounds like a great program. October 1, 2, 3 in Medina, and there is limited space, if I remember right.
Well, the room's only so big, and when they first started putting this together, COVID was still kind of on the horizon, maybe going to be an issue. We think by October, that's probably not going to be an issue, but still, the room's only so big.
Yeah. So go out to our website. We'll have a link to the Ohio Bee Conference of Being Diverse, and or go to the Beeculture magazine website and or the Beeculture magazine itself to find out more information. Coming up, we have Dr. Dewey Caron, returning to the show, this time representing Honeybee Health Coalition, and Texas Bee Apiary Inspector Mary Reed, who will be talking about their work on the predators and pests and the work the Honeybee Health Coalition is doing in that field.
I hope people are using the information that these people are putting out there for free. If you do what they say, I think Varroa, we would have canceled Varroa quite a while ago. I mean, they've got a very detailed management plan, but management for all sorts of things that deal with honeybee health. They've done a good job. They've put diverse people in the same room and not let them out until they've solved the problem, and it's really, really been effective.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking with them. In fact, let's get them on the show right away. But first, a quick word from our friends at Strong Microbials.
Hello, beekeepers. Your honeybees face a lot of challenges out there. Unbalanced food sources from monoculture crops, holding yards, drought, food shortages, antibiotics, pesticides, and pathogens like chalk brood. To overcome these challenges, your bees need the multiple bacteria that are in all nectars, pollens, and the environment. These bacteria aid honeybees' digestion and improve your honeybees' response and resilience to pesticides. Now you can help improve your honey colony health with a quick, easy, and safe-to-use product. Strong Microbial's Super DFM Honeybee uses naturally occurring bacteria to restore the healthy gut biome of your honeybees. Check them out today at www.strongmicrobials.com.
And while you're at the Strong Microbial site, make sure you click on the link to subscribe to their regular newsletter, The Hive, full of useful information and product updates. Welcome back, everybody. Sitting across the table from us virtually, our longtime contributor and friend of the podcast, Dewey Caron, and our new guest, Mary Reed. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
You bet. Thank you for being here.
It's good to have you guys here. Just for our listeners' information, Mary Reed is the current secretary of the Apiary Inspectors of America, and you are the Texas Apiary Inspector. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Good. And then Dewey Caron, of course, represents WAS on the Honeybee Health Coalition board. He lives in Portland, Oregon, and he's a longtime contributor to everything beekeeping in this country, I think. At the moment, he is writing the Beekeeping Basics column for the American Bee Journal, so he's a little bit everywhere all of the time. But welcome, Dewey. We're glad to have you back.
Thank you, Ken. Welcome. Glad to be back.
He's everywhere like Google is.
And I've heard as smart as Google, too. So
yes.
Every once in a while, we get the right answer, so that works.
Both Mary and Dewey are on the board of the Honeybee Health Coalition, and they represent two factions or two factors of the board. And what we're going to do today is have them explain what they're doing and what they hope to accomplish in the near future with the Honeybee Health Coalition. That we've talked about them before. I hope you've had a chance to visit their website. It is spectacularly full of information, and they're just going to keep adding to it. So, Dewey, start off with what you guys are going to be doing new.
Okay, thank you, Kim. Yes, Matt Mulica, who is with Keystone, our facilitator, talked about overall about the Honeybee Health Coalition in a previous podcast, and I hope you had a chance to catch that. So what we'd like to try to do today is sort of zero in on some of what we are trying to accomplish with this coalition. The coalition is over 50 different members from all sectors of our industry and our industry that we serve, both in pollination, services with our bees, and in our food products. I am representing Western Apiculture Society, one of about 5 regional groups of beekeepers associations, and I have been serving on a task force that we call Hive Management. Hive Management, when we were established, looked at what's happening to bees, what's going on with bees, and we quickly zeroed in, of course, in aspects of Varroa and the transmission of viruses. So what we set out to do initially was to offer the best information, scientifically based, that we could about Varroa and about diseases and about pests, and in a format that is readily accessible, and in a useful summary type format of the best of the basic information. So we developed tools for Varroa management, initially as a somewhat lengthy publication, and we since have made it easier to get to with a shorter version. that really talks about the Varroa and the importance of sampling for Varroa, of determining a number, not just do I have Varroa in my colonies, but how many Varroa are in my colonies, and what might then happen if I don't do anything for the next couple weeks, the next month. And so we designed then tools for Varroa management as a tool to supply the information about the various options from use of chemicals, the synthetic materials, the organic materials, to the use of non-chemical approaches, starting with very basic of the genetic material, the stock that you use, on through tools that you can use, techniques that you can use to try to keep a handle in terms of Varroa in bee colonies.
One of the nice things you have on the website, the Honeybee Health Coalition for the Varroa Management, is a decision guide for helping the beekeeper to decide what product they want to use on their colonies, whether or not they're more focused on natural beekeeping versus not natural, or using synthetic chemicals versus natural approaches, and then time of year, whether there's honey supers and whether there's not honey supers, and gives the beekeepers options. And that's a very useful tool for those trying to find an answer.
Yeah, and well,
ahead,
sorry to interrupt you, Dewey, but I just think that's a fantastic tool for beekeepers to use. And I often encourage beekeepers, even if they say they've monitored for Varroa mites and they see that there's an issue, still play around with that tool. I encourage beekeepers to, try out different hypothetical scenarios to see what your results are going to be. Because that decision tool, you're just answering 5 questions based on the status of your hive. And that really helps narrow down, what your options are depending on the time of year and what your hive is doing.
Yeah, it's really useful. I've told people to go there and check it out multiple occasions.
And one of the things that I found when I was looking at that is, even if you're fairly comfortable with what you want to do with Varroa management, those 5 questions will sometimes bring up something you've forgotten. And I've found that useful. So yes, go to the webpage, look at those questions, and you will have a lot better luck with Varroa.
One other feature we did with that is we actually recorded some videos. So if you, for example, never ever used the synthetic Apivar, the Amatraz product, there is a video on it in terms of short, but to the point of what you need to do and how you can do it.
Speaking of Amatraz, have you heard of any issues with that compound?
Well, when we rely on a single compound, chemical compound, as our major tool to control a pest, and we know this from all the ag background, that eventually there are going to be some issues with it in terms of how it is mixed, how it is applied, when it is used, a number of different aspects. So we know that with 4 previous materials that we have used, chemical materials that we've used for control of Varroa, the mites themselves have developed resistance. So we are expecting that they will develop resistance to this tool because it is Amatraz is used by the vast majority of beekeepers. We suspected this all the way back into as it started replacing the earlier compound that was so very useful, the fluvalinate, the APHIS product. So far, we find some inconsistencies in some bee operations, and this is looks like, or the data seems to imply that there might be the beginning of the development of resistance of the mites to this latest tool.
Well, that's not good news, certainly. No. Probably better news would be being able to not have to use any of those chemicals, but as long as we do, keep using the ones that are most effective, and rotation, I guess, right?
Yeah. Most of our materials that we've tried to make available for for beekeepers from the Honeybee Health Coalition do emphasize an integrated pest management or IPM approach. And that does basically try to utilize materials that are or approaches that are non-chemical and try to hold down the development of the pest population, in this case, the mites on our Varroa mites in our bee colonies. And then have the tools, the more powerful tools, such as chemicals, available when the population exceeds a level that for our bee colonies then means it will be causing some damage, some economic damage that can be measured. And what we have, of course, with Varroa mites are the shortening of the adult bee lives, the fact that the Varroa mites are facilitating the transmission of the virus, particularly the deformed wing virus, DWV. And so we need to keep a very heavy lid on their population increase as the season progresses, so that by the time bees are preparing for winter by raising those overwintering bees in August and September, the mite levels are not so excessive that we're starting to losing brood, as well as the shortening of the adult life of the bee host itself.
One factor that I like to include in any conversation about IPM, especially when we're talking about Varroa management, is the key is to monitor, rather than relying on time of year as far as your treatment schedule, but knowing what's actually going on in your hives and what those mite levels are going to tell you a whole lot on whether you need to do any type of intervention or not.
So from your perspective, Mary, what's a good monitoring schedule? How often?
Well, I think that's heavily reliant on, what kind of operation you run, whether you're small scale, a sideline, or a commercial beekeeper. It's going to be different on what your monitoring schedule may be. The Honeybee Health Coalition recommends in their guide, minimum of 4 times a year. But I specify, spread that out throughout the year. Don't do, January, February, 4 months in a row. Do the 4 seasons at minimum. But if you're, for small scale beekeepers, they can probably get out. I like to do, for my few hives that I have, I'll do once a month, because that gives me a better idea of how my mite levels are changing over time. Whereas a commercial beekeeper, they may, depending on, what they do within their operation for honey production or pollination, they probably can't be doing, every month, but there may be key points throughout the year where they can monitor and step in if they need to.
So, Mary, on this is kind of not off the wall, but off tangent. The inspection program in Texas, is that focused primarily on the commercial operations, or is it hobbyist as well?
So our inspection service here in Texas, we only have 4 inspectors for the whole state. And so as a result, we focus our inspections primarily on our migratory beekeepers for our annual inspections. But we cater to any beekeeper. So even if you have one hive, in your backyard and you want an inspector to come out, give us a call and we'll schedule an inspection with you. It's just that we do not typically seek out those smaller scale operations like we do with our migratory beekeepers. Okay.
And the inspections for commercial versus backyard beekeeper, do you have what's the preferred method of monitoring? Are you using IPM boards? Are you using sugar rolls, alcohol washes?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think that's going to vary based on your operation size and then also your management preferences. To me, I think alcohol washes are the easiest option for commercial operation just because it's so quick to do that type of sampling. Whereas other beekeepers that are at a smaller scale, they may not want to do an alcohol wash, but there are other options such as a powdered sugar shake. The sticky board can give you an idea of what your mite levels are. But things like sticky board and drone, looking through drone brood, it can give you an idea. It won't be as accurate as something like a powdered sugar shake or an alcohol wash. But regardless of what kind of sampling technique that you use, I encourage beekeepers to be consistent with it. So if you're using, let's say, powdered sugar shake, in the first half of the year, but then you want to switch to a sticky board, that's not going to give you the same, you can't compare those results. So it's better to just stick with doing a powdered sugar shake throughout the year so you can compare your mite levels throughout the year.
Better Bee is pleased to sponsor today's episode of Beekeeping Today podcast. For over 40 years, Better Bee has supplied beekeepers across the country with the tools, equipment, and knowledge needed to succeed. Because many Better Bee employees are beekeepers themselves, they understand your needs and challenges and are better prepared to answer your beekeeping questions. From their colorful catalog to their support of beekeeper educational activities, including this podcast, Better Bee truly lives up to their tagline of beekeepers serving beekeepers. See for yourself at betterbee.com.
Well, Varroa, of course, dominates the scene for almost everybody, but you mentioned pests and diseases, and that's only one. Two, Varroa and the viruses. So what else? How else are you looking at? What other pests and diseases are you looking at?
So coming from an apiary inspection perspective, my office, as well as other similar programs in the U.S., primarily look for foul brood disease. So that's either American foul brood and European foul brood. Those are two diseases that are typically considered regulated diseases in every state. So if those diseases are found in a honeybee hive, then extra steps are taken to mitigate the problem. But, with all the other, pests and disease issues that can pop up in a honeybee colony, we are also keeping an eye out for those sorts of things as we're conducting an inspection. And at least here in Texas, if we see something like, say, chalk brood in a hive, we'll just, let the beekeeper know that, we saw this disease and that they may want to take certain steps to try and clear that infection up.
Well, you mentioned foul brood, and of course that's what I was alluding to earlier. But one of the things that Jim Tu and I were talking on our other podcast, Honeybee Obscura, is what are the options when foul brood is discovered? It used to be burning. That was it. But is that still the case everywhere?
Generally, that's for every state or most states, that's going to be, unfortunately, the ending solution, just because it is the most effective way of getting rid of American foul brood. Here, at least here in Texas, for our inspections, if we suspect American foul brood, what we will do is collect samples, and we can do the in-field testing. We can do testing at our lab, but then we'll also send it off to the USDA for a third-party analysis. That yard will be quarantined in the meantime, but if there is a positive identification done, then those hives, unfortunately, do need to be destroyed.
That actually brings up another question that I hadn't thought about, but states that don't have inspection services or have very limited inspection services, and I'm a 4-colony hobbyist, and I look at a situation and I suspect American foul brood. I got sunken cappings, but I don't have any of the ropey, and I don't have, hardly any symptoms. And I say, okay, I got to solve this. I'm going to send a sample to Beltsville Bee Lab. What's the turnaround time for information on that? Do you have a feel for that?
Do you mean as far as getting results from the USDA?
Right.
Yeah, that's a good question. The USDA Beltsville Lab does provide this great service to beekeepers on processing foul brood samples for free. Their turnaround time is a little bit slower. I'm not sure what the turnaround time is exactly currently, but I do know that they had to pause over, because due to COVID, they had to pause on accepting samples. But they are now have started accepting brood samples, I believe. Don't quote me on that officially. I may not be remembering that correctly, but I'm sure they have information on their website. But they now are accepting samples again, but it's going to be probably a slower turnaround time for results.
Oregon is one of those states that has discontinued their program where I am now. And it goes back a long time, all the way back to 92. We've had a scare here with foul brood being perhaps distributed through packages and nukes, through nukes. A number of beekeepers now start by buying nukes rather than purchase of packages. And we are the largest state in terms of blueberry acreage, which for reasons we don't fully understand, often lead to conditions where colonies are very heavy with European foul brood. So filling that void in Oregon, the state university, Oregon State University, their bee lab does accept samples from Oregon beekeepers within the state, sort of as a backstop to the Beltsville Bee Lab, and they're sending there. What we lack, and of course, what a sample from sent to Beltsville lacks, is the follow-up. They will tell you what was in the sample, but then not information in terms of what the regulations in the state may be to how, okay, now you have it, or hopefully don't have it. It's a negative. But then what do you do? So that's where programs such as Texas, where Mary is, are rather different than states in Oregon where we don't have that regulatory backup to follow up on the disease.
Yeah, it's a mess sometimes, and I guess when I'm talking to new beekeepers is ask 4 times and get the answer that you don't have it, to make sure that you're going to be safe.
Or wait till you get the answer you want to hear. Yeah, they agree. Someone agreed with me, so I'm right. Hey, one of the pests, there's 2 pests I want to ask about, Mary and or Dewey, is one's a small hive beetle, because we don't have it here in Washington State yet, at least not in my part of Washington State around Olympia. Second is, way back in the 90s, there was the whole kerfluffle about the tracheal mite. Is that still an issue? Has it disappeared? Is it there but not a problem? What's the current thought on that?
So as far as tracheal mites go, it's considered relatively a non-issue at the moment, just because we don't see the populations of tracheal mites that we once saw. So it's not something that like inspection services look for actively. We're aware of what kind of symptoms can develop, but I guess we just have not been seeing the symptoms that are typically associated with tracheal mites.
Okay.
As far as small hive beetle goes, yeah, it's highly dependent on where you're located in the U.S. or even within a state, on whether small hive beetle is going to be an issue or not. Here in Texas, you could be on the eastern side of the state, and you'll see small hive beetles everywhere just because it's a moist environment, and they love that. Whereas the western side of Texas, it's a rocky desert, and that's not ideal for small hive beetles. But what I tell for beekeepers is it's good to be aware of small hive beetles and put some sort of doesn't hurt to put some sort of trap inside your hive to control the adult stage. But generally, it's considered a secondary pest, so it will not kill or be the reason for the downfall of your hive. It usually becomes a problem when your hive is weakened for some other reason. The other thing that I've noticed over the years is that beekeepers really like to focus on controlling the larval stage of small hive beetle. But to me, that's when you're starting to see small hive beetle larvae in your hive. You're to me way past the point of return, unfortunately. So just think about controlling the adult stage and keep a good, strong, healthy colony, and you'll be fine.
A true definition of a pest.
I'm sorry, that's where the IPM comes in by doing that monitoring. The traps actually to try to detect the adults are very inexpensive, very easy to use. And here in Oregon, where we do not see them consistently, but when they seem to get in, when they get into an operation, then they stay. They consistently find them afterward, continuing down the road. And so it's really kind of, again, monitoring, back to the monitoring to get the adults before you then get the larvae creating all the damage. Try to determine you have adults, so you need to do something before that damage. You see the damage.
Very good. Thanks.
Basic common sense there, but sometimes it gets forgotten. Well, that's pests and diseases. I know you guys have a good handle on that, and you're continuing to monitor these things, looking at new innovations and new products and new techniques. But what else are you guys looking at?
Well, one of the things that Honeybee Health Coalition is looking at is trying to facilitate the search for additional chemicals that might have activity against the mite. And we have helped facilitate some funding. There are studies on candidate materials that are going on, in the U.S., Canada, and in Europe, in a group that is joined together. So we're going to need eventually a replacement for the Amatraz, and it may come from this exploratory work that's being done that's in part supported by the Honeybee Health.
Well, that sounds good. I'm glad somebody's continuing to look out for my best interest. And I couldn't think of better people to do it. And I saw something there you guys were looking at was it biosecurity? And what's that about?
Yeah, so we talked about IPM and monitoring ahead of time. We are very complacent with our livestock, with our honeybee colonies. We'll go into a colony and then immediately go into another one. We'll have 2 or 3 colonies open at the same time. We'll transfer frames from one to the other. This is particularly in large scale, the commercial and sideliner beekeepers, but even our backyard beekeepers. And so bee biosecurity is looking at really a couple of different aspects. One is, as we've discussed, Texas has a very strong regulations and enforcement about bee diseases and looking for things that might come in. But Oregon has none of that. So there is a national effort led by the U.S. Department of Agriculture by a unit called APHIS, Animal Plant Health Inspection Service. And they are charged with looking for exotics, things that we don't now have in the U.S. And so they have partnered with many states, Texas and Oregon, in all over 30 states, and they are doing samplings of apiaries in the state and looking for sort of the first line of defense, looking for and ensuring that some of these exotics, things that we do know about, are not yet into our bee population. So that's part one, keeping things out that we would like to keep out. And then the second is once something is in the U.S., such as occurred with tracheal mites and Varroa mites, and the most recent one has been the Asian giant hornet, seeking efforts to better define where that population is and what the direct threats might be to our bee colonies. And that's where bee biosecurity by each and every individual beekeeper comes in, because we can do a better job in trying to keep these common pests, such as the foul broods, and the very serious pests, such as Varroa, from being widespread, infecting all of our colonies by taking some basic security measures to help confine or potentially confine an invasive or the pest that we already have to a smaller number or a limited number of the colonies or to the apiaries in which we keep our colonies.
From a practical standpoint, that would be perhaps, how would you do that? Is that beyond different tools for different yards and booties and everything for different yards, or what are you talking about specifically for a beekeeper?
Mary's has had to deal with the beekeepers in Texas in terms of tracheomites coming in and how they have to deal with Varroa. Perhaps, Mary, you'd like to try to start with an answer on that?
So for your question, are you asking like what specific tools?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I wasn't very clear. So just in terms of the biosecurity of biosecurity of an apiary, how would a beekeeper go about doing that? So we talk generally about protection and everything, but how if I go to my yard this afternoon, what can I do to better protect my bee yard from any kind of contaminants or diseases, pests or diseases?
First and foremost is just being aware of what possible issues can arise related to honeybee health. Really that is the most tangible item that a beekeeper can grab hold of, is ensuring the best that they can that their hive is healthy. So whether that's, from a nutrition perspective, making sure they have a healthy, productive queen in there, making sure that the pest and disease levels are low, and making sure their apiary is tidy. Believe it or not, that goes a long way. I also encourage beekeepers to, every time they open up their hive, is to go into the brood chamber and look at what is happening in that brood chamber, because the activity in that part of the hive and how the larvae is looking, how the cappings are looking, how the queen is doing, that's going to tell you so much about how productive your hive is going to be, how successful your hive is going to be, and if there are any issues arising that hopefully the beekeeper can prevent or control.
Well, good. Thanks.
Definitely good advice.
Yeah.
Definitely good advice. Look at the brood nest. What have we missed, guys?
Well, there's one other issue that we've now decided the Honeybee Health Coalition probably needs to focus a little bit more on, and that is looking at the whole picture. So as a hive management task force, we've been looking at the hive and looking at the pests in the hive and developing our tools for Varroa management and a best management guide for how you would handle security issues between apiaries, within hives, etc. But looking further down, and we're looking at replacement Varroicides as I'd indicated as well. But looking down the road, it is often things that are beyond our apiary gate that seem to be issues related to how successful our industry is, and success here being measured by having colonies strong enough to provide pollination service, which has now become the major income earner for our large-scale beekeepers, but also for honey and the security of producing a clean, residue-free product by our sideliners and our small-scale beekeepers as well. So we've focused on the issue of perhaps looking at better biosecurity for our bees, but also what's happening to the plants that are available, the nectar and pollen that bees rely on. And one of the factors that seems to be an issue with that is climate change. So we are starting to focus in terms of bee nutrition. What is happening to the bees when they go into a blueberry pollination? They come out worse. When they go into watermelon pollination, the colonies go downhill and come out from that pollination event in worse shape than when they went in. And so the beekeeper is doing everything that he or she might want to do to have good, strong colonies to provide that pollination service, but something is happening in that particular event. Climate change may or may not be factors. We have looked in terms of, for example, a study done on the East Coast where the rise in CO2 affects the level of production of nectar from goldenrod, which is a plant that is bees are heavily reliant on overwintering on. And we know with climate change, one of the factors is temperature changes, but also changes in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, as well as violent events, or more prolonged events, or more serious rain events, for example, or droughts that may occur. Our bees are not isolated. They're very much dependent on what's going on in the environment. And one of those things that is going on is climate change. So we're starting discussions in terms of how could our efforts in an integrated method of looking at bees with the Honeybee Health Coalition, how can we try to get a better handle on what climate change might or might not be doing, and then what might be some mitigation? What can some beekeepers do if their bees are being more directly affected by changes in the climate?
Well, when you solve that, let us know, will you? We could use that information just sooner rather than later, I think. One of the other things you mentioned, drought, and of course the West this year is, 2/3 of the West is just dry as a bone, and then you have forest fires, and all of that is outside the apiary until it isn't, and then you've got a real problem. So, well, Jeff, we got anything else?
No, my head hurts. There's a lot of information here. It's always a pleasure, Dewey, having you on the show. And Mary, it's been very nice to meet you, and look forward to having you back. A lot of bee things happen in Texas. We need to hear more about them.
Thank you. Yeah, I had a lot of fun chatting with all of you.
Thank you.
Mary, thanks. Dewey, good to talk to you again. And both of you, I hope we can get you back again.
Thank you.
Definitely.
It's a pleasure.
I really enjoyed having Mary and Dewey on the show. The Honeybee Health Coalition does such great work, and they're not very well known.
Yeah, that's kind of surprising. And I again encourage people to visit the webpage and use the tools they have on there. Those 5 questions they have are, like I said, spectacularly effective in rooting out any problems you may be having. But Jeff, did you ever think you'd be having a discussion about climate change in beekeeping?
No, not until no, I haven't. It's amazing.
Yep, it's and it's makes perfect sense.
Oh yeah.
Yep. The environment dries up, the plants don't grow, the bees got nothing to eat, or it rains all of the time and the plants don't grow, and the bees got nothing to eat because it couldn't fly there anyway. So I see the issues.
And they're talking in California, all the water restrictions and everything else, and wonder how that's going to affect. I don't know, but I wonder how that's going to affect all the growers in the Central Valley and ultimately the almond people. And
well, it's up in your neighborhood too.
Yes,
you're having water issues.
Yeah,
or Washington and Oregon, and
all the apples and pears and peaches, and then you have all the seed crop down in Oregon. It's a big deal. It's amazing. It is a global issue, and I'm glad that we're looking at it, and I hope that we can help the beekeepers be better prepared.
And as I sit here, I'm looking out the window at the 3rd day of rain in a row.
And
I'd love to share some of it with you.
You convert a cubit down to a board foot yet? How many cubits? Yeah, so this is a great series. I'm glad we're able to do this series of shows, episodes on the Honeybee Health Coalition. We had our first one, the introduction and to the Honeybee Health Coalition with Matt Mulica, and this with Dewey and Mary on the Predators and Predators, Pests and pestilence. And we're going to continue exploring the Honeybee Health Coalition in future episodes, about one a month. So, folks, look back, check back, and learn more about the Honeybee Health Coalition.
And just learn more.
Yes. Go out to their website.
Yep. Okay.
I recommend it.
Yes, exactly. All right. I guess this wraps it up, Jeff.
Yeah, that does. That wraps it up. Before we go, I want to encourage our listeners to rate us 5 stars in Apple Podcasts, wherever you download and stream the show. Your vote helps other beekeepers find us even quicker. You know, folks, really, get those reviews out there. We really need some new reviews. The folks that have sent out reviews, they're great. New reviews are always better. Anyways, it helps beekeepers looking for a new podcast know what you like, and you can get there directly on our website by clicking on reviews along the top of any web page. As always, we thank Beeculture, the magazine for American beekeeping, for their continued support of Beekeeping Today podcast. We want to thank our regular episode sponsor, Global Patties. Check them out at www.globalpatties.com. We also want to thank Strong Microbials for their support of the podcast. Check out their probiotic line at www.strongmicrobials.com. And we want to thank Better Bee. Check out all their beekeeping supplies at www.betterbee.com. And finally, and really, most importantly, we want to thank you, the Beekeeping Today podcast listener, for joining us on this show. Feel free to send us questions and comments at questions@beekeepingtodaypodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you. Anything else you want to mention, Kim?
I think that about wraps it up. I've had enough climate change for one day.
All right. Thanks a lot, everybody.